So some red oaks, thermals, onyx, and a healthy dose of luck went into me being successful here in the first week of the Pennsylvania archery season. And I want to break this hunt down a little bit because the little handy cam that I was using and currently filming on is not the best quality, and my second angle camera isn't either. The low light situation that I'm in a mixture right here behind the camera of evergreens as well as some close canopy forest. It got dark in here very quickly, well 15-20 minutes before the end of legal shooting light, and I so happened to arrow my doe about 10 minutes before legal light was over. So everything was pitch black. I'll still play some clips through the video here so you can kind of get this hunt breakdown. I felt like this hunt was just a typical run-of-the-mill hunt for me. Like, I knew what I was doing. I came in, I executed the hunt, and everything worked as I had planned, or as I had hoped rather. But I realized that what my thought process and stuff might not be for you if you're new to the sport of archery and archery hunting in particular. And you might have gun hunted, but you're not used to getting close like you have to in archery season. I kind of want to share some tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way, but also that I applied to this hunt that I don't feel are tips and tricks. I just feel they're kind of basic things and understanding of how to hunt, bow hunt, and particularly in the early season. So let's break this hunt down here from the beginning. Real quick, in case you're interested at all, here's the lighted knock video. And here's a picture of the deer. Yippee skippy, if you're done with that, you can stop watching the video now. If you want to continue to learn here, continue watching. Here we have the red oak that I was sitting in. This sucker's almost 2.5 foot in diameter. It was not the ideal diameter size tree, but ended up working perfectly. That's where a healthy dose of luck came into. Behind the camera here, back up in here is the point of a ridge that comes down. And I'll talk more about the topography here in a second, but this is the biggest red oak here. And then there's red oaks about half to 2/3 the size strewn all the way up through here, and you might even be able to hear some today. They are dropping acorns like it's raining them out here, and they're just everywhere. And I was seeing sign from all different types of critters, turkeys and squirrels, as well as some deer rooting around to find red oak acorns. So I knew I was in a real good spot for this early part of the season here. We're in the first week of October. I knew I had a good chance of seeing deer. Now, I didn't see a whole lot of scat. I didn't see a whole lot of fresh sign, but we'll talk about why I didn't expect to see them milling around in here for too long. And we'll get on that here in just a little bit. But let's move the camera up here. Let's get a little bit better lighting. I want to move up to the logging road trail and talk about how that really plays into how this piece of property actually plays. One of the biggest factors that I've discovered here hunting in Pennsylvania now for my entire life, the better part of 17 years, is understanding the history of my state, and particularly the area of the state that I hunt in. That's really important for you and your particular state that you might hunt in as well. Pennsylvania is known for its natural resource use, so timber, coal, strip mine, natural gas is the big thing now. And so that really actually literally shapes the landscape. So for example, right here, I'm on this logging road here. I'll do a pan around here so you can actually see it. And there's several logging roads that have created benches all up along this ridge line here. This is a very steep peaked ridge. You might be able to hear the road behind me. They even have a high wall in order to keep, like we would typically see on an interstate type thing. In order to keep rock and stuff from going down onto the freeway, they've carved out a high wall. So I know that access from hunters can't happen over here. This is just a real skinny, this piece is almost shaped like the state of Oklahoma. This is like the really thin finger that pops out of the main pocket of the piece. The main pocket of the piece, there's some CRP. We're not too far from the axis actually here. From the axis, I'm probably about, a little less than half a mile. But from in terms of other private that comes down here, I'm probably less than 400 yards. So this little sliver of public here that runs up this way, like I said, it's shaped like the state of Oklahoma. On both sides of that finger are very steep, and there's no access either side for public access. There's some private ground you can access it from, and on the other end of the tip, you can access it from down there. But it's not really all that conducive because the way this property sets up, you'd be approaching the south. We get a lot of southwest winds. People don't come from that way. They just blow out anything that was bedded on either side of these ridges. So I'm accessing from this way. I'm taking the long hike in. Took my time, and I wanted to scout these logging roads. Like I said, there's one circumnavigates the entire property. I'll throw some pictures up on Onyx as well. And there's one that cuts right over the top of this ridge, runs right down the peak of the ridge. I've hunted up on the top of the peak of that ridge before, but there's not the food sources up there. It's more of a travel corridor, kind of a rut spot, because it pinches down a little bit. Deer coming off of private or coming up here off of public to kind of cross up in there. But I knew early season it probably wasn't going to do all that well compared to what we're in. I mean, right here I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The one that I just was at, 11, 12, 13. There are 13 red oaks here that are at least 18 inches in diameter, and they're all within a 25-yard shot of where I'm standing right now. And it is just raining acorns. I mean, I'm standing here. Here's 1, 2, 3, oh my goodness, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and they're healthy, right? So this is actually really cool. Jonathan Catman from Catman Outdoors, Jonathan Baum, he did a great video on red oak and white oak acorn healthiness and how you know if you got a good acorn or not. You can crack into it. Let's see if I can crack this one open here. Red oak acorns are notoriously tougher than white oaks. But basically, if you pick up an acorn and it feels like a ping pong ball, like it feels like when you toss it, there's no like weight when it hits back into your hand, it feels really light and really fluffy, it's bad. It's either rotted, worms got to it. In this case, this year, I was really nervous about our acorn crop. No white oaks in my area are producing this year because we had a really late frost right into turkey season. Killed off a lot of the white oaks. They're a lot more susceptible to that type of stuff than red oaks are. Red oaks are much hardier. Man, the acorns are hardy too. I'm trying to crack this one open. But anyway, if you get a good acorn, it'll have some weight to it. It won't feel like a ping pong ball. It'll feel like a marble or a small ball bearing. And when it hits into your hand, it'll have some actual weight to it. The shell will often be a lot glossier. If you get like a matte finish or an eggshell look finish to your acorns, it's probably rotten. It didn't mature. Back to what I was saying about the stress on the trees, I was really worried about the red oaks this year. We had a drought here in PA, worse than I've seen in a long time. The entire month of July and in the first couple weeks of August, we got very little rain, actually almost no rain the entire month of July. And they started to stress drop. So they were dropping acorns about half this size. This is a pretty good standard size red oak acorn here. All these are real good, healthy looking acorns. And they were starting to stress drop them when they were still green because they weren't getting the moisture. And I was really worried if we didn't get some cooler temps and some rain that they would stress drop most of them and we would not have any acorn crop this year. Well, thankfully, the Creator blessed us with some rain and they are raining acorns now. So I knew that we would have an overabundance of red oak acorns, which we do this year. And I knew I needed to find a good cluster of them. All these red oaks are very healthy, they're very mature, and they're all clustered together. So I knew this would be a good spot. You can find some red oaks that are really big and really isolated. Like if you want to watch my buck hunt from last year, there's a huge red oak. I knew that would be the biggest one on the property. And it would turn out to be really hot, and it actually did. I ended up harvesting a buck. I'll put that link in the description below. But in terms of me looking on OnX, I'm looking at OnX on an aerial image, and all of a sudden I saw this giant swath of bunched, really tall canopy. And if you can kind of see it if you know what you're looking for. And I saw it right here at the end of this point. I've hunted this piece before, I've never hunted this corner. So when I saw that canopy, I was like, gosh, it's got to be either huge maples or big red oaks, because white oaks don't usually get that big. They usually just get thicker. And it turns out it's just huge red oaks. All of them are red oaks. There's a couple of maples sprinkled in here and a few evergreens. But right now, I've probably heard a dozen acorns fall in these high winds today in the past 2 minutes. So I knew there was going to be deer in here. So when I came in to scout, I'm walking this logging road. We're very close to access, right? You can probably hear the road. Like I said, we're less than 400 yards away. I was kind of worried if there would be deer in here. But a big thing that I like to look for is turkey sign. So you guys in the south, you have other rooting species on the ground. You have armadillos, they'll get up and scratch and root through things. We basically have squirrels, which are pretty easy to decipher from a turkey. If you see turkey sign in an area under like this, which I have all turkey sign all through here, all down this logging road, if you get turkey sign, that is a great deer hunting spot. And the reason why I say that is because turkeys can only get into an area during daylight, right? Deer can come in here at all hours of the day. It can be 4 o'clock in the morning and deer can be coming in here, deer can be coming in here eating acorns. Turkeys have to do everything from dawn to dusk. So if you got turkeys in here, that means they feel safe, even with all the human activity that's coming around. They feel secure, and it must be a big enough food source right now for them to want to be on these acorns. There is private ag way down, like I said, shape of Oklahoma. We're way down there, probably 3/4 of a mile, half mile, at least 2/3 from where we are. There's ag down there, corn, soybeans, and some cut hay fields. I know the deer are going to want to go out there, but the problem is we've now had a cold snap. And we now have a cold snap where that type of stuff is starting to turn. The soybeans are starting to turn. A lot of the stuff that was in the hay is not as palatable. It's gotten over tall and mature. And the deer have had to transition their food, and they want to transition their food to more carbohydrate-rich meals instead of protein-rich meals like they would find with soybean leaves and that sort of stuff. And so they're coming to carbs, which is straight up acorns. Big old fatty nuts, a lot of good oils in them. They're gonna start putting on fat. And actually the doe that I had already shot had already had a good layer of calf fat going on her rump and onto her back straps already. And it's only the first week of October. So I knew they had to be transitioning to red oaks. We hadn't seen it a lot recently, but we've really gotten some cold temperatures. Today it's actually pretty mild. It's in the high 50s. Expected to be up in the 60s late this afternoon. But on opening day, on Saturday, we had 33, 34 degrees. And then on Monday when I shot, it was only in the high 40s in the afternoon, low 50s in the afternoon. So we've definitely had some cooler temps. It's pushed deer onto the red oaks. So why I picked this particular spot, I flipped the camera around, because back here about 300 yards that way, on like the other side of this little Oklahoma finger, is another red oak bunch that looks exactly like this. Why didn't I sit that one? It's actually closer to the axis, and there was also a good amount of acorns. The reason why I sat this one, again, was that turkey security sign, but also I could scout that and come back to it if this one didn't look as good. So this is another thing. I don't do evening hunts. They're just not my cup of tea. I don't really enjoy evening hunts. I don't like blood tracking in the dark. But in this case, I made the exception because the sign was so good. When I came in on the public access, that side, came all the way up through the main part of the piece up to this finger. When I came in over there, there was almost no trees that I could really get safely set up in. And the wind playing over there was going to be awful. So the way this piece sets up, like I said, it goes down into the major portion here. We're on this side hill. So thermals are going to pull from my back right now down, right? So my tree that I actually end up sitting in is over here. I expect deer activity to come from this way. So when it actually settles down and this west wind stops, the thermals are going to get sucked down that way following the topography. The way that over there, where the suspected bedding is on the private, on that side, my thermals in the evening, when it actually settled down and it got cold, my thermals would have sucked right down into that bedding area. They were fine with the wind. Right now, this westerly wind, almost a northwesterly wind, it was fine until it settled down in the evening, and it did. Like a light switch went off. Literally, as soon as the wind settled down right around 6:45, the thermals just, I could feel them hitting me in the face, coming dead nuts out of the south to follow this topography line down onto the private. And if it happened over there, I would have been up the creek without a paddle, because my guess is that they're bedding on the private to come up onto this piece of public. Whereas here, I think they're bedded on this side hill, and their wind, when that thermal shifts, is going to be at their back. They'll be able to see what's in front of them and smell what's behind them, come right down this hill, right down the pipe, and give me somewhere in the flavor of a 20 to 30 yard shot. So even though that was an easier access and I could hunt that, burn it out, and then come over here and hunt this part another day, it just didn't make sense based on the thermals and the wind direction. This one made much more sense. And again, this comes back to understanding your state and understanding what type of topography you have, because the topography here is created by these roads. There's the road that comes up here, the road that I'm currently standing on that runs exactly this way. So it all follows the cuts. All of that wind, all those thermals follow that. And if you live in a state with topography, you got to keep a strong mental note on that. In the mornings, that thermals are going to go up the hill, right? So this would not be a good morning spot, because if I expect them to bed over here and that sun comes up in the east behind me and it pulls up all that heat, it's going to blow it right into that bedding area. And if I'm sitting over here, I'm toast. In the evenings, it's going to fall down because it cools off, and it's going to follow down the topography, and that's what I set it for here. So let's look into this red oak flat. Why did I not actually sit in the red oak flat? Well, obviously up here, like I said, the topography comes down with the thermals, but also all of these trees here, the biggest one is the one I sat in. So I made the inference that if they're going to bed over here and follow the thermals, right, put the wind at their back, smell what's behind them, see what's in front of them, they're going to come down here, they're going to pick their way through all this cover, and as soon as they get on this open logging road, it becomes incredibly open. They don't have any topography here. It starts to flatten out. This bench extends for quite a good ways. It starts to flatten out significantly. And as soon as they get out of all this evergreen, you can see some understory cover. As soon as they get out of this, it's going to widely open up and they're going to expose themselves. I didn't think they would do that until dark, which is exactly what happened. I shot my doe on this logging road at 7 o'clock on the dot, because that's when it was basically dark. It was almost completely dark out here. With these evergreens that are behind, the sun setting in the west, it just gets so dark in here so fast. 6:45, my camera's completely lost all light. So I knew that from over here, if they were going to come down, they're going to mill in here to the very last second, come out in this logging road to move into the private and other food sources. Like I said, there's some ag that way. There's no ag this way. It's all CRP and that type of stuff, which makes perfect sense. They'd bed in that and browse in that all night. It's wide open. It's several acres down in there. So it just made sense. Just everything, when I came in through and scouted, I took my time. It went easy, went slow, didn't rush it. I have a real bad habit when it comes to evening hunts of coming in and either rushing it and picking a really bad setup, getting all set up and it's too late, or spending too much time goofing around trying to find a spot, track my scent through all of this, and then pick that tree, but then they would have blown on my ground scent and it would have just been miserable. So I'm glad that I made the decision that I did and took my time. And how I did that, basically I sat here with binoculars, and it was hard because of the wind, but I tried to look up, but I didn't have to look up for long. I basically just stood there about 40, 50 yards away from this spot, from the access, and I listened. I just stood there and listened, and I just heard acorns raining down. Walked up this logging road, which makes sense, this public access logging road. People are going to be on this all the time. People walking their dogs can come up in here. It's public land. You can do whatever you want. And so I figured if I could see a human and animal sign on this logging road, I was going to be in business. And sure enough, turkey sign, acorns and caps all over the place. A couple piles of scat that were old, but there was too much food. The topography and the wind direction was going to be too good. The thermal's too good for me not to take this spot. All right, so I'm standing where she was standing when I shot her. This is the red oak right here, the big one that I was sitting in. I was roughly about maybe 13 foot to platform height, 14 foot, which puts me at eyeball level with the top of the ridge behind me here. So if I zoom out here, I'm sorry for the shaky camera footage. So what happened here, and this is the actual like breakdown in of itself. So here's the logging trail, right? You can see it as it, it comes down here and snakes and winds its way all the way that way. This hillside here is where I expected them to bed on. I was kind of worried that they would actually spot me when I came and walked up this access road. I was worried that they would spot me bedded up somewhere in here. To be able to see the access, deer do that a lot. They'll bed up high on a side hill to look down on the access, in particular a piece of public that's this wide open. And if they were up there, they didn't spook, or if they cared, I don't know, they must not have been up there bedded, or they were bedded over on the private, came all the way over here because the food was so good. Basically what happened around 6:30, and I'll put in some clips of the footage I did get before it got too dark, had a doe come in by herself all the way up, just right nowhere, and I could see her for 100 and some odd yards off. And she came right into the oak flat here, 2 feet. So she's feeding in here, she's milling around, and I'm back up in my tree back this way, and I can see her. She's by herself. She's clearly a mature doe. She's not the biggest doe I've ever seen, but she's definitely a mature doe. I would take the shot. Well, as luck would have it, multiple fawns showed up. 2 fawns showed up, and then actually a third showed up, and they were even nursing. And although at this point in the year, even though it's the first week of October, they might nurse a little bit. They're full ruminants at this point. They were eating acorns, the whole shebang. They don't need the mother's milk anymore. But with 3 fawns, that she was either, she had twins, or she fostered one, or fostered 2 and had one, I don't know. 3 fawns is a lot of fawns, and she is going to be their caretaker through the entirety of the firearm season, archery season. She's going to take care of those fawns. So I was going to give her a full pass. So they're up in here, milling around, doing their own thing. They eventually worked their way down here to the logging road. All right, so here's the logging road here. This stump here is the far side of the logging road here. Obviously, you can see where I was standing a little bit earlier, scuffing around. Although up there is some turkey sign as well. Here I am, where I'm standing is about an 18-yard shot. And the doe and the 3 fawns, I had 1 fawn come right underneath my tree, about, 3-4 feet away from my tree. And I thought, oh, it's over. Like, it's going to smell me. Well, it didn't, which I guess shouldn't surprise me too much. It is just a fawn after all. But it didn't come out. It didn't smell me. And then the other 2 fawns also came out, and they also walked past me. And this doe was standing about right where I'm standing, about an 18-yard shot from where I'm at right now. I was like, great, now they're going to sit here and eat acorns the entire time. I'm not going to take this shot at this doe with 3 fawns. Well, then out of nowhere, and there's a huge red oak back in here, right on this side hill. I mean, it's enormous. It's got to be a solid 3, 4, 5 foot in diameter almost. There must have been another doe eating the acorns off of that tree, a lone doe all by herself, and it's the one I ended up shooting. And when I field dressed her, she was dry. So I don't think she either had a fawn, and it, you know, something, or she didn't have a fawn, I don't know. But she came in here all upset, big mature doe, good mature doe. And she came down here and she almost bleated and kind of like wheezed at this doe here with the 3 fawns, kind of pushed them off. And she came right to where the camera was standing. And I was like, geez, if you're gonna be a jerk about it, you're gonna get an arrow. So I'm up in the tree, it's getting real dark, and I got 5 deer, all within a 20-yard radius of me right now, and they're all looking down onto the private, which is what I anticipated, right? I anticipated them to hang up in here until right at that last point where it gets real open down here in these hardwoods, so they can kind of filter down into private without being seen. As soon as they got down here, I already had my bow. I'm shooting a decent sized peep 3/16, but even when I pulled it back, how dark it got in here, it was still a little bit on the fuzzy side. Pins were good though, my CBE looked great. But I pulled back and I have 4 deer here, and I'm sitting there in the saddle on the back side of this tree trying to hide behind it as much as possible. And I'm drawing as incrementally slow as I can. I really wish my second angle camera would have gotten it. And I got about 3/4 of the way back, and I had one of those little lurch yip moments because the doe kind of turned to look at me real quick. And I'm holding her at like 3/4 draw. Eventually she turns, I get back all the way to full draw. She took 2 steps, I clicked at her, bang, bang, bong, it was over. This camera is so terrible. We lost all light, all light. I had 2 fawns come in with a doe, and then there was a lone doe, and the fawns came right underneath my tree. I don't know if my second angle picked it up, and I'm pretty sure I just hosed the lone doe, about a 20-yard shot. She big mule kick. She ran about another 50, 60 yards, could have stood there, and it looked like she was in trouble. My hair, my nock's glowing down there. So, I don't know. We'll have to climb down here before it gets too dark. I completely forgot a light, so get everything backed up. I'll see you in bed. She ran down here and she actually got about 50, 60 yards away up on this hillside. I could see her up there. She was doing the wobbly tail flicking thing, and then she did the death run, and she actually hauled it a pretty good ways. It was a great shot, double lung, textbook. Couldn't have asked for a better type shot. Right behind the front shoulder, about 2 ribs back of the front shoulder. And she actually ended up being just slightly quartering 2. It's really tough to tell. I think it also had to do with just kind of the angle of the side hill here. But it went in about 2 ribs back on the entry side, went out about dead center of the ribs on the other side, both lungs. Great recovery, good blood trail. And actually that stinger was completely unfazed. I took it apart, cleaned it, put it back together and spun it. It spins like a top, so I'm gonna sharpen that sucker back up and use it on a different arrow. But it was just such a good hunt and just a great moment of following the thermals, following the food sources, and understanding that they're gonna stage and come down. And it was just so funny. I was sitting there in the tree stand, and I'm just thinking to myself, you know, I just want to see a deer. I just want to enjoy the experience of seeing a deer, seeing a whitetail, and I didn't even care if I got a shot or not. Well, then of course the doe shows up. Good shot. Fawns. Third fawn. Oh man, that's hilarious. Then this one lone doe shows up, and like from the time that I saw her, from the time that I shot her, was probably less than a minute. It was really actually really an interesting hunt and really cool perspective to have that. All right, so that's enough for this rambly, very long video. I apologize, but if you have any questions about anything that I've been talking about, or the scouting portion, or the onX portion, or the food sources, or whatever, please follow links in the description below. Hit me up on Facebook and Instagram. Send me an email, and yes, of course, you can leave a comment here on YouTube. Hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery. Archery hunting, if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful, all the colors are turning creation, and we'll get to see you next time.